Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another weekly reading vlog. I thought we could do something kind of unique with this weekly reading vlog because May 5th, I believe, is the 200th anniversary of Napoleon's death. So it has been 200 years since Napoleon died, and this is my year of Napoleon. I have been trying to read books about Napoleon and books that Napoleon himself would have read. So I kind of wanted to theme this weekly reading vlog around reading some of his favorite books. I say favorite, I just know that he read these books. I do know a couple of his favorites, and they're actually rather hard to get their hands on. So Ossian was his favorite poet, which is kind of a series of epic poetry from Scotland. And it's posited to be by a guy named Ossian, so far as I can tell. But it's actually written by a man named James Macpherson. And he pretended to translate this from Gaelic into English, or he just plain made it up. At any rate, his favorite poet is Ossian, so it's actually very, very difficult to find an edition of Ossian's poetry, and so I am really curious as to whether or not this actually was a hoax. This seems very interesting to me, but I think Ossian kind of falls under the Romantic umbrella, or the earlier Romantic umbrella. I know that Napoleon also really loved Homer, and specifically I think he loved the Iliad. I have been meaning to reread the Iliad for a few years now, and I actually have a new edition of the Iliad. Well, new to me. I have a new edition of the Iliad on audiobook translated by Robert Fitzgerald. And so I'm interested to try that, but I don't know that I will really include that in this video because sometimes listening to poetry like that is a little bit of a struggle to me. But I do have three things on my shelves that I know he read and I know he loved. One of these is actually a kind of controversial pick. So I will tell you what my little TBR is of Napoleon books. So the first of these is Candide by Voltaire. I don't have high hopes for this. And I don't think actually that Napoleon much cared for Candide. Napoleon was very willing to criticize Voltaire and Rousseau, which I think is really, really interesting. I think what he tended to like from Voltaire was Voltaire's epic poetry as well. I think Napoleon was really into epic poetry, and so am I. I knew that Napoleon and I would get on. But essentially, I'm going to view this TBR as books that I am buddy reading with Napoleon. So I'm hoping that as I finish each of these, I can find his own writing on these works. I know that there has been a lot of discussion around Napoleon's opinion of some of Voltaire's plays, but I don't know specifically if he ever said anything about Candide. I do think he kind of quite generally panned kind of the philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau by saying they made things up and that he didn't really agree with them. And I tend to think that's the way that I will feel. This is a satire. It's a very short novel. And essentially, so far as I can tell, every character in this is going to kind of represent some kind of philosophical ideal. He wrote this in a way to argue with the idea that we're living in the best possible universe. We are living in the best possible timeline. I'm sure I just completely butchered that, and I'm sure I will learn more about this as I get further into Candide. I've already started reading this, and there have been bits that have been a little bit funny. So I'm hopeful that I continue to think that they're funny, but I do believe that this is going to be very episodic in nature, and that typically is a struggle for me. Next is one of Napoleon's favorite books of all time, and this is The Sorrows of Young Werther. And so this is a big classic of kind of the Romantic era. This book essentially started the Romantic era, according to some historians. And so this is one that I have tried before and I put down, and I really struggled with it. I don't think it's for me. I really don't think it's for me. So I have some trepidation about going into it this time, just because I know I struggled with it the first time. I can sometimes struggle with novels that were written in the 1700s. And so this is kind of a wider discussion for me. This is just kind of a wider issue that I know I have. I sometimes struggle with the 1700s. But this is a translated classic. This is translated by Michael Hulse. So I don't know if this is the best translation to get of Werther, but it is one that I found used. So I'm really I'm excited, but I know exactly what's going to happen here, and I'm not quite sure that it's my cup of tea. It definitely is Napoleon's, because Napoleon was at heart an utter romantic. I mean, absolute romantic. And I mean that in every sense of the word. I don't just mean in terms of he liked romantic poetry and romantic novels. He was an absolute sap for Josephine, and I love it. I absolutely love him for it. I think what gets me about Napoleon is that side of things. I'm absolutely not interested at all in his military conquests. Do not care. I absolutely don't care about any of the war stuff. I'll find myself skipping over things that have to do with battles and war, but his own personal notes on things I do find interesting. I really love to read his own writing on how he did certain campaigns. Now that is interesting to me, but what's mainly interesting to me about Napoleon is who he is as a person. I think he is incredibly fascinating and incredibly dynamic, and I don't necessarily think we would have liked each other, but maybe through this experiment we will find something that we agree on. In a wider sense, I would really like to read this just to say I've completed it in terms of reading romantic novels, in terms of reading things that were important to the Romantic era, which is another of my favorite time periods. And so in that regard, I feel like Napoleon and I get on because I think we have similar taste, but this is one we will see. I did want to give myself a break and pick up some poetry because I know Napoleon really liked poetry, and one of his favorite epic poems was The Liberation of Jerusalem by Torquato Tasso. Tasso is one of Napoleon's favorite poets, and I think he and I are going to agree on this. I really have a good feeling about this. Can't put my finger on it, just know that I am going to love it. And so this is an epic poem that takes place during the First Crusade, and I believe there are female warriors in it, and I really didn't need to know anything more than that. I just know I'm gonna really enjoy it. The interesting thing is when you look up books that Napoleon read, you can find lists of things that he kept in his own personal library, but they're very rarely ranked. You essentially know which books Napoleon read, but you're not quite sure what he thought of them in most cases. I am sure that Napoleon loved Tasso and that he also loved Werther. I think he first read The Sorrows of Young Werther around the age of 18, and it was an absolutely formative book, and he carried a copy with him throughout the rest of his life. But I know that when he was on St. Helena, that he read for multiple hours a day, and he frequently returned to Homer, and often when he started Homer, he read him straight through. He didn't just pick him up and read his favorite parts again, which is something that I tend to do with poetry, is that I will go back to poetry and read my favorite sections again. That's why I'll mark things. And so he apparently also was prone to do that with Tasso. He designated an entire section of his library, his traveling library, and the library that he brought with him to exile on Elba and St. Helena. He designated an entire portion of that to be epic poetry. And so Tasso is one that always came. I chose Torquato Tasso's Liberation of Jerusalem over Ariosto's Orlando Furioso because apparently this was more of a perennial favorite for Napoleon. This is one that he reread quite a bit, and specifically that he reread in exile. Though I know most people say you should start with Orlando Furioso before moving on to this because they're very similar works, and this is clearly building on that. But I think I'm just going to try this because I have such a good feeling about it. And I can always go back to Orlando Furioso. It is also on my yearly TBR as a book that was a favorite of Napoleon's. Napoleon really liked epic poetry. Unfortunately, I don't know his opinion on Dante. I'm sure he loved Dante. He had to have loved Dante. If he didn't love Dante, we are not going to get along. But I think through these three books, I am going to be able to span Napoleon's life pretty interestingly. So The Sorrows of Young Werther will be his young life. Candide, Voltaire will be kind of his soldiering life. He read a lot of French drama and poetry while he was on campaign a lot. So Voltaire, Racine, Moliere, that type of thing. And then exile. A lot of the books that he read in exile, he was rereading because he got the opportunity to read for multiple hours a day when he was in exile there at the end. So interestingly, I think that this will be a very good selection of things, and we're hitting 3 different countries, which I love, really exciting. I don't think I will like Candide. I think Candide will wind up being at the bottom of the list. Then I think it will be Werther, And then I think at the top will definitely be Tasso. So in some regards, I think Napoleon and I are on the same wavelength, but I am curious to see how I will feel about these other books. I am comforted by the fact that Napoleon was apparently quite critical of Voltaire. He didn't really think anybody was above criticism except maybe Homer. So I am really excited to get into these and see if my opinions align with Napoleon. Hopefully I can find his opinion on things and I can find an actual quote from him about these books, but I doubt it. I will check in with you when I have finished one of these shorter works. So we're in a semi-new location right now. I thought I would update you about this Napoleon reading vlog, which has not gone extremely well. So the first of these that I have finished is Candide by Voltaire. And as I predicted, I absolutely hated this. In fact, I would rate this maybe 1 or 2 stars. I just really did not like this. And I understand that this was likely not one of Napoleon's favorite books. Napoleon's favorite works of Voltaire were his drama, I believe, and some of his epic poetry. And so I understand that Candied is likely one that really was not one of his favorites, but it's just one that I know he read. I tried to look up his opinion on Candide, and I really couldn't find anything, specifically not his own words. He does have some things to say, very interesting things to say about some of Voltaire's dramas. I very well may have said this earlier, but honestly, were it not for this project, were it not for reading books that Napoleon read, I likely would never have picked up Candide in my life, and maybe Voltaire in general, I should say. I doubt I would have picked up were it not for this. And I think I would be a happier person for it. Even though it was a really short book, it did feel like a waste of my time, especially when I'm reading other more interesting things, in my opinion. And the reason I struggle with things like this is that, you know, there's not really a real story. There's not really real characters. All of the characters and, you know, essentially the story as a whole are stand-ins for a sort of philosophy. Essentially, all of this is written to take down the philosophy that we are living in the best timeline, we are living in the best universe. And so Voltaire is kind of thinking that that's a very stupid way of thinking about things. And so that is, to my knowledge, why he decided to write Candide. And on the whole, things like that, things that are just really vehicles for philosophy or vehicles for ideas, that really is a struggle for me. Sometimes it works very well, and sometimes it does not. In this case, it did not. I do sometimes struggle with the shorter work as well, but I really won't say that I think the length is what brought this down for me, because I don't think that it was. I think in general, I just don't really care for Candide, and that's fine. So this can go on back to the used bookstore. Definitely there are parts that are witty, and there are parts that do seem a little bit humorous that actually do make you laugh. But on the whole, I just really did not like this. I also finished the other short work that was on my list for this vlog, and that's The Sorrows of Young Werther. And this was just, like, I'm very torn on this one, because I think in theory, I really like this. In theory, this makes a lot of sense to me. And in theory, it's playing with a lot of ideas that I really respond to. So this is a classic of Germany, and essentially it is always kind of credited as kicking off the romantic genre. And I see why. It's a really interesting work that I'm not gonna say I enjoyed. Parts of it are very beautifully written, but it is an incredibly darkly sad work. And luckily I've been in, you know, just a really good mood this week. But if I was already feeling kind of down, this is not the book I recommend you pick up. Now I went into this knowing everything that happens, and I won't spoil it for you here. I won't tell you anything about it since it is so short, but it is an epistolary novel. that is essentially told from one point of view. So you get letters from Werther, but you never get the letters back. And I think that was a really interesting choice. I really like epistolary novels because I do think they are really introspective and they allow you to learn so much about the characters. And in this case, you do learn a lot about Werther. And towards the beginning of the book, it's really kind of bright and cheerful and springy almost. There's a lot of kind of discussion of nature. It's really beautiful. And then as the book progresses, it becomes so heavy and it becomes really, really depressing. And this was definitely Napoleon's favorite novel. This is a work that he carried with him throughout his life. He always made sure he had a copy of this in his traveling library. He made sure he had a copy of this on Elba and St. Helena. And I believe he first read this when he was 18. And so honestly, I think reading it at 18 was probably the best choice for it. I think this goes hand in hand with a work like Wuthering Heights, that if you read it at a point of real angst and emotion for you, then you are really going to understand it. And I think you're going to like it a little bit more because I first read Wuthering Heights when I was an angsty 17-year-old. And I think that added to my enjoyment of it. I think it added to kind of the lightning strike moment of knowing you're reading a great novel. I think Werther would work in a similar way when you're at an age where your emotions are extremely heightened. I think you understand Werther to an extent, and you still do at an older age. You still really understand Werther, and that's what makes it so deeply sad. And now this book has a very kind of controversial history in terms of kind of pop culture. So this book was a really instant bestseller. People loved this. People tried to dress like Werther. Napoleon tried to dress like Werther. But this also apparently inspired people to take Werther's path. And I think that's largely been exaggerated. If you know what's going to happen in this book, or if you've read it, you know what I'm referring to. And I think that's largely been exaggerated over the years, but it has kind of made this have a contentious history in terms of pop culture, in terms of being a banned book, because it is apparently very influential on your emotional state. And I definitely agree with that. It's a very emotional book. Parts of it are really beautifully written. But at the end of the day, I don't know that I would say I ever plan to return to it, and I wouldn't say, honestly, that I really liked it. And that's fine. You don't have to like everything that you read, but this was definitely Napoleon's favorite book. He considered this, one of the greatest of all time. And I see why. I kind of recognize what he saw in it, which is the point of this reading vlog, and the point of this project is I really, kind of want to get to know Napoleon and almost feel as if I am buddy reading these classics with him. And this, I see why Napoleon himself got on with this, because Napoleon was kind of a wasted romantic. I just wasted away with love for Josephine, because I'm getting ready to go get some flowers. And so you will get some B-roll of some flowers. But since I'm going to look at flowers and kind of get my thoughts together about planting for spring and summer, I thought that maybe I should look at Napoleon's favorite flower, if Napoleon had a favorite flower. And you might scoff at this if you think Napoleon is just like a regular military man. But Napoleon was definitely a kind of a lovelorn sort of guy. And so I looked up if he had a favorite flower, and he did. And it was the violet, which was Josephine's favorite flower. And he always wore a violet in his lapel after she died. I just love it. He's just so iconic. I mean, truly, that's iconic behavior. He loved her. I mean, truly, he loved her. That's some of the most interesting aspects of Napoleon's life to me, is that I think we often hear Napoleon and Josephine talked about as one of the great love stories of all time. But she really was not into him in the beginning, and she was cheating on him left, right, and center, and he never believed it was going on, and he really, really loved her. And so even even when he was in exile, I mean, he thought about her all the time. His last words were about Josephine. It's just wretched. And I think that that's probably why this book spoke to him so deeply. Even as a young man, just getting into that relationship with Josephine, I think he could see himself in Werther. And walking away from this experience of reading this, I do feel like I know Napoleon better. And I definitely see what Napoleon saw in this book. On a personal level, I just don't think I very much enjoyed it, but the subject matter is really, really hard. And if you were not in a good place mentally, do not pick this up. Really, do this when you're like in a happy, happy mood. The sun is out, flowers are blooming, because this is a heavy hitter. And I really do think it can take a toll on your emotional state. It's a very odd novel to be so short, but this is one that I'm really glad I read for a lot of different reasons, because I really wanted to read more of kind of romantic inspiration. So this is kind of doubly reading alongside Napoleon, but also reading alongside figures like Mary Shelley and Lord Byron. This was a very important book to them and to their generation. And so I feel like I kind of have a wider understanding of Napoleon's generation as a whole, because this is a book that's probably one of the first instances we know of where pop culture was so heavily revolving around a novel. I think in the modern day, we might equate it with something like Twilight or even Game of Thrones. So it's a really, really interesting work historically. It's an interesting work in its own right. So I think I will give it 3 stars. I think I'll give Candide 2, maybe even 1. I just really did not like Candide. But in terms of the third book that I have been reading for this project, I am loving it. This is going to be a 5-star read. So this is Jerusalem Delivered by Torquato Tasso. So this is an Italian classic, and this is an epic poem that is set during the First Crusade. And I just want to tell y'all, I'm obsessed with this. I don't even have words for this. Like, there are no words for how exquisitely beautiful this is. And there's going to be female warriors in this. I'm on Canto 2. I don't intend to finish this for this vlog. I thought I might be able to, but sometimes you start reading something and you know it's going to be a special experience. You know it's going to be 5 stars. And I just know this book is going to be 5 stars. And so sometimes when I get that sense, I decide that I don't really want to read the book, if that makes sense. Sometimes when I know I'm going to really love something, I don't want to read it. And I want to put it off for a little while longer to kind of keep it special, I guess, or to save it for a special occasion. But I really do think this is one I'm going to have to take my time with, because I just love epic poetry. It is very long, but it's so beautifully written. I'm going to read you a few of my favorite stanzas so far in Canto 1. O muse, not you, who upon Helicon garland your brow with long since faded bays, but you who among heavenly choirs don your golden crown of deathless stars always. Breathe in my breast celestial fire, shed on my song your light, and pardon if my lays, embroidering the truth, seem overgrown at times with pleasures other than your own. I just am a sucker for a rhyme, and so I said this is going to be a special one right on the opening page, but this is what cemented it for me. So this book kind of kicks off with God deciding that Godfrey of Bouillon will be the hero of the First Crusade. And so Godfrey of Bouillon is a real historical figure. Most of the characters in this are real historical figures so far. There are a couple who are fictional that Torquato Tasso has related to his patron. So the man who's kind of sponsoring him to write this work, he has a fictional ancestor called Rinaldo d'Este, who is in this book and is, as far as I can tell, one of the few fictional constructions. But so he kicks this book off with God kind of talking to Gabriel. He's looked down on the men who were going to be fighting in the First Crusade. The First Crusade has gone on for years at this point, and he doesn't like certain members of the crusade because they're very concerned with fame, or they're just concerned about themselves, or concerned about their own love story. And he thinks Godfrey is a really good choice to kind of lead this campaign. So he tells Gabriel, who is a really famous angel in his contingent, he tells Gabriel, who is frequently used as a messenger in the Bible, to go down and have a discussion with Godfrey and tell him that he really wants Godfrey to lead the kind of final expedition into Jerusalem to take Jerusalem. And so this is what Gabriel does. Gabriel transforms, kind of into a human aspect, and it's so beautiful and so vivid. So he spoke, and eagerly did Gabriel speed to perform his bidding, and in air rendered his viewless spirit palpable, with mortal limbs and shape of an age somewhere between boyhood and youth, such human shell, but charged with awe and splendor everywhere. He made his own, and fixed upon his maze of golden curls a nimbus of white rays. White wings he donned with tips of gold, whose climb is indefatigably swift and sure, with which through winds and clouds he soared sublime, above round earth's and ocean's curvature. We just don't write like this anymore. People don't write like this anymore. And I wish that we would. I mean, genuinely, like, it was so vivid. I can see Gabriel as he kind of transforms into this boyish looking man, and, the crown of rays that is around his head. I mean, beautiful imagery. I think sometimes we struggle with visualizing poetry. This has been so easy to visualize, and it's been so incredibly rich. Last but not least, this is my favorite stanza so far, and I posted this on Instagram because it almost moved me to tears. He invokes the muse a lot, which makes this feel very classical to me, but he's very interested in fame and making sure that these men's names live on. So he's about to list who is involved in the First Crusade. And so he says, "O memory, time's foe, oblivion's shame, guardian and steward of all deeds of might, lend me your force of mind that I may name each leader and each company aright. Resound and illustrate their ancient fame, already dulled by years and dimmed by night. Yield me your treasure, beautify my tongue, to keep them for all time, forever young." Wow. Truly, I have goosebumps. I mean, wow. It's absolutely beautiful. This is translated by Max Wickert. Max, you're incredible. This is an incredible translation because I feel like I'm getting a very good translation. Of course, I don't really know that since I haven't read the original, since I can't read Italian, but this really makes me want to. This really makes me want to get an Italian workbook so that I can see if he has done this any kind of justice, but I think that he has. Sometimes, though, you feel like you're in really good hands with the translator, and so far that's the way that I feel with this. Now, Napoleon would definitely have been able to read this in the original language because actually, I believe French is Napoleon's third language. So first he speaks Corsican, the kind of dialect of Corsica, and then of course he speaks Italian, and then he speaks French. So Napoleon was definitely a learned man, and he could definitely speak a lot of languages. So I imagine Tasso is something that he read in the original. But so far, this is easily my favorite of the bunch, and I definitely don't think I'm going to finish it in this vlog, but that is my current update. Okay, so it is Sunday, May 2nd, and so I decided it's time to wrap up the Napoleon vlog. I have not finished Torquato Tasso's The Liberation of Jerusalem, and I didn't think that I would because it is a very long work. But words can't express how much I am enjoying this. I tried to look up specifically what Napoleon had to say about this, and I can't find specific quotes. I do believe that he kind of compares Tasso to John Milton, which is a really, really interesting comparison to make because I would not say that Paradise Lost and The Liberation of Jerusalem are trying to do similar things at all. So that's really interesting if that's the comparison that he decided to make. I just know that this was one of his favorites, and I think it's definitely going to become one of my favorites. So 1 out of 3 is not too bad in terms of my Napoleon TBR here, especially considering that I don't really know how Napoleon felt, especially about Candide. So it very well may be the case that he also did not like it. I am really shocked, though, that he apparently enjoyed this because there are a lot of really strong women in this poem so far. I mean, women who are wearing armor, women who are fighting on the battlefield, and it's not played for laughs. So far, it hasn't been. These women are really respected, and the male war leaders want the women to fight for them. So it's been a really interesting work, and I found it revolutionary, to be quite frank. Napoleon was quite misogynistic, actually. So I'm very shocked that he was interested in a work that featured such strong female characters. I mean, reportedly, he never talked to Josephine about things that were going on in the war or politics or anything like that because he didn't think she was capable of understanding them, which is just absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. He had a very poor opinion of women so far as I can tell from everything that I've read, which is an unfortunate thing because it does make me like him less. But I am really, really loving this so far. So hopefully everything else that I have on my reading list that Napoleon also read will also be a hit akin to this, but I do just love epic poetry. So I think I was set up to really enjoy this one. I am only 2 cantos in, but I am just loving it. And I think I'm going to enjoy taking my time with it. I'm glad I didn't pressure myself to finish it for this vlog. So I think my initial thoughts were right, and the one that I thought I would like the most is definitely true. The one that I thought I would like the least is also definitely true. But today it is May 2nd, and 200 years ago today, Napoleon was getting really, really sick. I believe he was spending most of the day puking and bleeding. So some people think that Napoleon was poisoned, but other people think Napoleon had stomach cancer because he was plagued with a lot of digestive issues in his later life. But May 5th will be the bicentennial of his death. I can't believe, really, that he lived until 1821. That's really shocking to me because it means that he had the opportunity to read Frankenstein. I wonder if he did it. I wonder if he read Frankenstein. I wonder if he liked it. I wonder if he read Lord Byron. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. That's really crazy to think about. A large part of why I want to do this Napoleon project is that I want to get closer to him as a person. And I was hoping that through reading these books, I would feel like I understood him a little bit better. And through Werther, I definitely think I see exactly what Napoleon saw in that book. I see why Napoleon loved it. And that does make me feel a little bit closer to him as a person. It makes me feel like I have a little bit more of a handle on him. But please let me know down below if you have read these, and let me know if you agree with Napoleon. Are any of these some of your favorite books? But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.